Everyone pays attention when there's a countdown. Deadlines make people nervous. They sit up straight or check the clock, pretend they're calm while their thoughts start racing, because a warning with a time attached feels different. It feels urgent. It feels personal. You start asking yourself what you might be missing, what you've ignored, what you've convinced yourself could wait. And that's the trick. Most damage doesn't happen suddenly. It happens because people believe they have more time than they actually do. Warnings aren't loud. They don't scream. They show up as discomfort you keep pushing aside, as thoughts you drown out with noise, as small signs you joke about instead of facing. You tell yourself you'll deal with it tomorrow, next week, after things settle down. But time doesn't slow down just because you're avoiding something. It keeps moving, quiet and patient, letting consequences line up while you stay distracted. A real warning doesn't come with instructions or comfort. It just creates awareness. It forces you to look at the patterns you've normalized, the habits that feel harmless, because they're familiar, the choices you repeat without questioning why. By the time you notice the damage, it usually feels obvious in hindsight. That's why warnings feel cruel. They don't change anything on their own. They just remove the excuse of ignorance. People think danger always looks dramatic. It doesn't. It looks ordinary. It looks like another ignored instinct, another postponed decision, another conversation you avoid because it's uncomfortable. And the longer you delay, the louder the silence becomes. Not loud enough to scare you, just loud enough to remind you something isn't right. When a warning reaches you, it's not asking you to panic. It's asking you to pay attention, to stop assuming you're untouchable, that consequences only visit other people, that there will always be a cleaner moment to act. Deadlines don't exist to threaten you. They exist to expose how much you rely on delay to feel safe. By the time Wednesday morning arrives, nothing magical will change. The warning won't suddenly become clearer. The choice will still be yours, and the clock will still be moving, whether you're ready or not. The only difference is whether you noticed the signal when it was still quiet enough. To do something about urgency has a way of doing what comfort never can. It cuts through the chatter of everyday distractions, the hum of routine, the pleasant illusions we wrap around ourselves like blankets. People like to believe that life will wait, that problems will pause, while they finish breakfast or scroll through notifications or sip their coffee in peace. But urgency doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about your timing or your plans. It doesn't knock politely and leave a business card. Urgency barges in, sometimes gentle, sometimes brutal, and it forces a choice before you're ready to make one. Most people think they respond to urgency logically. They think they can analyze it, weigh the risks, measure the outcomes, and then act with perfect timing. But the truth is, urgency doesn't wait for analysis. It thrives in instinct. It exposes what people are really paying attention to, and what they've been pretending doesn't exist. When something becomes urgent, your distractions dissolve, your routines crumble, and suddenly every corner you thought was safe feels like it's too small to hide in. There's something uncomfortable about urgency because it's impartial. It doesn't care about status, preparation, or past achievements. It doesn't respect excuses. You can't charm it, bargain with it, or bribe it. It doesn't show mercy for ignorance or indecision. It simply exists, pressing against the edges of your awareness, demanding that you notice it before it becomes impossible to ignore. That pressure, that insistence, is what people fear. It forces them to confront the parts of their life they've ignored, the unfinished projects, the neglected relationships, the promises to themselves that never quite materialized. Urgency is a mirror. It doesn't lie. It doesn't flatter. It reflects what you care about, what you avoid, and what you've been pretending doesn't matter. When a situation demands immediate attention, It reveals your priority, not the ones you claim, but the ones that actually guide your actions. And that revelation is uncomfortable because most people think they are in control of their lives. But urgency proves how fragile that control really is. People often confuse urgency with panic. They think if something feels urgent, it must be catastrophic, or they must be failing. But urgency isn't about catastrophe, it's about awareness. It's about noticing the moment when something demands engagement before consequences escalate. Panic clouds judgment, but awareness illuminates options. The people who survive, who thrive, who make the difference, are the ones who distinguish between the two. They act without hesitation, but not without thought. They don't ignore the alarm simply because it's inconvenient or frightening. Urgency also reveals character. When confronted with a situation that cannot wait, you see how someone behaves without the usual facades. Do they flinch? Do they rationalize? Do they step forward? Every delayed action, every hesitation, every rationalization is visible when the clock is ticking. You can't hide under preparation because preparation never covers everything. Urgency finds the gaps. It discovers what you are capable of when the margin for error disappears. The interesting part is that urgency isn't always obvious. Sometimes it whispers, barely noticeable over the background noise of life, waiting for someone perceptive enough to hear it. People often ignore it because it's subtle, because it doesn't scream. And by the time they recognize it, the consequences have grown louder, unavoidable, undeniable. The subtle warning becomes a crisis. The quiet alarm turns into chaos, and suddenly everyone remembers that the clock has been ticking all along while they were distracted by trivialities. Urgency is relentless because it doesn't forgive procrastination. It doesn't offer second chances based on good intentions or careful planning. Time doesn't pause for people who are waiting for the right moment. It keeps moving, dragging consequences behind it like a shadow that never sleeps. And in that movement, urgency doesn't just demand attention, it demands response. It asks you to act before Wednesday morning arrives, before the opportunity vanishes, before the chance to influence outcome slips quietly into someone else's hands. Those who embrace urgency without fear gain a strange kind of freedom. They stop pretending that control exists in neat packages. They stop believing that delays protect them. They recognize that attention, decisiveness, and willingness to face uncomfortable truths are far more powerful than any illusion of safety. Urgency, in its purest form, doesn't punish, it clarifies. It shows what matters, what is avoidable, and what is unavoidable. It lays bare the choices you keep postponing, the truths you keep ignoring, and the moment that could define the difference between surviving and thriving, between being remembered and being forgotten, between noticing in time and realizing too late. Ignored signs have a way of piling up quietly, like dust in the corners of a room you pretend to clean. People walk past them every day, smiling at normalcy, pretending everything is fine, while the subtle signals of danger or opportunity whisper insistently, waiting for attention. The human mind has a remarkable talent for ignoring what it doesn't want to face, for convincing itself that postponing awareness is harmless. And most of the time, that trick works until it doesn't. Signs are never dramatic. They don't arrive with a trumpet fanfare or a neon arrow pointing at them. They are small, almost invisible. A hesitated word, a skipped heartbeat, a shadow at the edge of perception. People ignore them because paying attention is inconvenient. It forces reflection, action, and sometimes confrontation. Ignoring is easier. Ignoring allows comfort. Ignoring lets you tell yourself, I'll deal with it later. Later is a seductive lie, because it feels safe while the clock quietly moves forward, ticking toward consequences that will not wait for your convenience. Ignoring signs is a form of denial. It's convincing yourself that nothing is happening while everything is happening quietly underneath the surface. People convince themselves that because the signal is subtle, it must be optional. They mistake subtlety for insignificance, but the quietest signs are often the loudest warnings in disguise. The ones people dismiss are the ones that will surprise them most brutally when the consequences finally arrive. There is a cruel logic to this. Human attention is finite, and most people spend it on distractions, routines, and comfort. The mind avoids cognitive dissonance by filtering signals that threaten the story you tell yourself about your life, your control, and your safety. Ignored signs slip through these mental sieves and wait. They wait because timing is irrelevant to them. Their significance doesn't diminish just because you've chosen not to see it. And when the moment of reckoning comes, signals multiply, becoming undeniable, unavoidable, overwhelming. Signs are ignored because people are accustomed to predictability. They expect life to follow the same rhythm, the same rules, the same familiar patterns. Anything that deviates, however subtly, is brushed aside as an anomaly, a blip, a temporary disturbance. The human brain craves consistency, even when consistency is a lie. When something threatens that illusion, it's easier to ignore it than to confront the possibility that reality might be more complex, more urgent, and more demanding than expected. The danger in ignoring signs is not just the consequence itself. It is the slow, almost imperceptible conditioning it creates. Every ignored warning reinforces avoidance. Every overlooked signal teaches the mind that awareness is optional, that attention is expendable, that discomfort can be deferred indefinitely. Over time, this behavior compounds, leaving a person unprepared for the inevitable moment when a subtle sign becomes an undeniable reality. Ignored signs are also revealing. They expose the human tendency to privilege convenience over truth, comfort over clarity, routine over awareness. People ignore because they are afraid of responsibility, afraid of disruption, afraid of realizing they were wrong. Ignoring signs is not weakness in the traditional sense. It is self-preservation performed with clever misdirection. You tell yourself that postponement is strategy, that avoidance is control, and that pretending nothing is happening is protection. But ignored signs never vanish. They don't care about excuses, rationalizations, or justification. They accumulate like shadows, stretching longer with each passing day. Eventually, they intrude into awareness in ways that cannot be denied. A conversation you postponed leads to misunderstanding. A health warning you overlooked leads to crisis. A choice you delayed leads to irreversible consequence. Ignored signs are patient but relentless, silent but loud, subtle but fatal. Understanding ignored signs requires a different kind of attention. It requires listening to whispers while everyone else hears noise. It requires observing patterns while others see randomness. It requires noticing the small deviations that hint at larger shifts. And most importantly, it requires courage, the courage to face what you've been avoiding, to act on what you've been ignoring, and to accept that the consequences of neglect may already be approaching faster than you think. People ignore signs because it is comfortable, it feels safe to continue living as if the warning doesn't exist. But life doesn't pause for comfort. Time doesn't forgive negligence. Every ignored signal accumulates weight. And eventually, the burden of avoidance becomes too heavy to carry lightly. Ignoring signs might feel harmless in the moment, but the moment is fleeting, and the consequences of inattention are patient, observant, and unforgiving. Those who pay attention, who notice when others do not, gain advantage. They act while others hesitate. They prepare while others ignore. They survive while others are surprised. Ignored signs are not random. They are opportunity or danger disguised as subtlety. Recognizing them requires abandoning convenience, embracing discomfort, and being willing to confront reality before reality confronts you in return. Delay creates false safety. People live their lives believing that time is on their side, that tomorrow will be easier than today, that by postponing decisions, dangers, or responsibilities, they are protecting themselves. There's comfort in delay because it gives the illusion of control. It tells you that the consequences can wait, that the pressure isn't urgent, that life can be handled later when you're ready. But delay is a trick. It convinces you that safety exists when in reality it is only temporary, borrowed from the illusion of tomorrow. Human beings are masters at justifying delay. They tell themselves, I need more time to prepare. I'll deal with this later. Or, it's not the right moment. Every excuse feels reasonable, logical, and rational. The problem is that life never guarantees the luxury of readiness. Time moves forward regardless of preparation, and the longer you postpone facing what matters, the more it accumulates, and the more uncontrollable it becomes. Delay lulls people into a trance of perceived security while danger, opportunities, and consequences quietly build in the background. False safety is seductive because it allows people to remain passive. People believe that by waiting they reduce risk, by procrastinating they reduce exposure. But that is a lie. Waiting does not eliminate risk. It often amplifies it. Every delayed decision, every postponed action, every ignored warning is a debt. It does not disappear quietly. It compounds. The price for postponement rises, sometimes slowly, sometimes explosively, until the moment you finally must act, you realize the cost is far greater than you imagined. Delay also distorts perception. When you postpone, your mind convinces you that everything is stable. You ignore subtle signs, rationalize small warnings, and prioritize comfort over action. You think safety exists because immediate danger is invisible. But invisibility does not equal absence. Just because the threat hasn't manifested yet doesn't mean it won't. The comfort of delay is a mirage, a trick of perspective, a way to convince yourself that postponement is strategy rather than negligence. People delay because facing reality is uncomfortable. Confrontation requires courage. Responsibility demands attention. Action requires risk. It is easier to distract yourself, to focus on tasks that feel urgent but aren't important, to scroll endlessly, to busy yourself with trivialities. Delay is a form of avoidance masquerading as prudence. It lets you pretend that control is still possible, that life can still bend to your will, that tomorrow will bring a chance to do what you are unwilling to do today. Yet, the longer you delay, the less room there is to maneuver. Decisions become more urgent, warnings become louder, consequences grow sharper. Time is impartial. It does not negotiate or forgive. Delay does not protect, it postpones reckoning. Every moment spent waiting is a moment in which the world moves without you. Every postponed choice is a missed opportunity to act, to prevent, to influence, to survive. False safety becomes the heaviest trap because it feels like freedom until it snaps shut unexpectedly. There is a deceptive sense of control in delay. People believe that by waiting they have more information, more resources, more clarity. But clarity often comes too late. Resources may shift or vanish. Opportunities are not paused by indecision. Waiting, while comforting, is a gamble that rarely pays in the way the mind imagines. It is the quiet surrender to uncertainty, dressed up as careful planning. Delay also exposes priorities. What you choose to postpone reveals what you truly fear, what you secretly undervalue, and what you are unwilling to risk. The things you act on immediately are the things that truly matter or frighten you most. The things you delay accumulate not because they are unimportant, but because they challenge your comfort, your ego, or your sense of control. Delay is the shadow of fear and avoidance, quietly shaping your life while pretending to protect it. The danger of delay is cumulative. Small delays grow into large consequences. Ignored signs grow into crises. Postponed decisions grow into irreversible outcomes. Every postponed action is a time bomb ticking quietly hidden beneath the veneer of calm, waiting for the exact moment when it can no longer be ignored. People are rarely aware of the full weight of their postponement until it arrives with force. Those who recognize the illusion of safety in delay act differently. They understand that waiting is rarely neutral. They know that time is an active force, indifferent to fear or hesitation. They choose to act despite uncertainty, to confront discomfort, and to embrace risk rather than cling to the illusion of postponed safety. Acting in the moment rather than waiting for a perfect moment that never comes is the only way to break free from the trap that delay sets. So quietly, so convincingly, so dangerously, awareness is the first form of action. People like to believe that doing something means acting, that motion equals progress. But motion without awareness is noise, distraction, a performance designed to convince yourself you are in control. True action begins with seeing clearly, with recognizing the truth of a situation before it is too late. Awareness is uncomfortable because it forces honesty. It exposes the illusions we've constructed, the routines we rely on, the safety nets we cling to. It doesn't wait for convenience or permission. It arrives demanding acknowledgement. Most people mistake distraction for safety. They fill their lives with noise, calls, messages, obligations, tasks, anything that keeps the mind busy and the heart from noticing the undercurrents of reality. Ignorance feels like security because it allows postponement, because it lets people pretend that danger, opportunity, or consequence is someone else's problem. Awareness interrupts that illusion. It stops the mind in its tracks, demanding that attention be paid to what has been quietly growing under the surface, waiting for recognition. Awareness is often resisted because it exposes responsibility. When you truly notice, you realize how much of your life has been shaped by avoidance. Every ignored instinct, every postponed decision, every overlooked warning becomes visible in a harsh light. The comfort of pretending, the illusion of control, evaporates. People fear awareness because with awareness comes the requirement to act. Recognition without action is not protection. It is preparation for regret. True awareness does not come politely. It doesn't arrive with reassurance or clarity. It shows up as discomfort, as anxiety, as the sudden understanding that things are not as safe as they seemed. It appears as the nagging sense that you should have noticed earlier, that you should have acted sooner. People who ignore this discomfort convince themselves it's irrational, that it's an overreaction. But it is not. Discomfort is a signal. Awareness is raw and undeniable, insisting that you confront reality before reality confronts you. Being aware requires looking past appearances. It demands seeing patterns, not just events. It demands observing subtle deviations from normal, inconsistencies that others dismiss as irrelevant. Awareness thrives in observation, in quiet attention, in the willingness to notice the unnoticed. It's a skill most people avoid cultivating because it exposes effort, responsibility, and the unpleasant truth that life doesn't wait for comfort or preparation. Awareness also reveals timing. People assume that if a problem is not urgent, it can be ignored. If a risk seems small, it can be deferred. Awareness shows the truth. Timing is always moving, always indifferent to hesitation or procrastination. Noticing early is not alarmism, it is survival. It allows options before the window closes, before consequences accumulate, before the chance to influence outcome is gone. Awareness is the difference between seeing the threat when it is small and facing it when it is overwhelming. Awareness forces honesty with yourself. It forces recognition of patterns of behavior, repeated mistakes, and vulnerabilities you've been ignoring. Most people live in denial, believing that their habits, their routines, or their planning shields them from consequence. Awareness strips away these illusions, exposing how fragile and conditional safety really is. It shows what has been allowed to grow in the shadows, unchecked, ignored, and underestimated. Ignoring awareness is seductive because it preserves comfort. It allows you to tell yourself that nothing is urgent, that everything is under control, that you are fine. But comfort is passive. It is a veneer, a lie that dissolves the moment real urgency arrives. Awareness, though uncomfortable, creates the possibility for real choice, real action, and real survival. Without it, people move blindly, only realizing too late that the window for influence has closed and that the consequences of inattention are unavoidable. Awareness is also what separates reaction from understanding. People act without seeing, without knowing, and fail. They rush into noise, into panic, into decisions guided by fear or impulse rather than insight. True action begins with the clarity that awareness provides. It aligns perception with reality, exposing the invisible threads that connect cause and consequence. Awareness is not a guarantee of safety, but it is the only preparation that counts. Those who cultivate awareness understand that it is not passive. It is engagement. It is attention sharpened into action. It is the refusal to let life pass unnoticed while consequences accumulate quietly in the background. Awareness does not provide certainty, comfort, or delay. It provides recognition, clarity, and the possibility to act while options still exist. It is the first step toward breaking free from illusion and stepping into the truth, a truth that is as urgent as it is unavoidable, and that demands presence, honesty, and courage at the exact moment when the clock is ticking. Ordinary moments carry extraordinary warnings. People move through their lives expecting the dramatic to be the signal, the explosion, the crisis that cannot be ignored. They think danger, opportunity, or change will announce itself in neon lights with fanfare and clarity so they can prepare. But the universe rarely works that way. It hides its messages in plain sight, in whispers, in slight deviations from normal, in moments that seem mundane until you realize too late that they were never ordinary at all. The problem is perception. People are trained to ignore subtlety because it doesn't demand immediate reaction. They see a small hesitation in someone's behavior, a faint pattern repeating a quiet signal, and they dismiss it. It's nothing, they tell themselves. It's probably fine. That dismissal is a habit, a coping mechanism, a way to feel safe while danger or opportunity grows quietly in the background. Ordinary moments feel safe precisely because they are ordinary. They are familiar, predictable, and easy to ignore. Yet ordinary moments are deceptive. They carry embedded instructions, warnings, and chances that you can only recognize if you are paying attention. A slight change in routine, a small sign of avoidance, an unexpected question, a casual remark, they all contain information about what might come next. Ignoring them is seductive because it maintains comfort, but it also leaves you blind to the undercurrents of reality. The world rarely screams its intentions. It whispers, and only those who are listening notice. People also fear noticing. Awareness in ordinary moments forces recognition. It reveals patterns they prefer to deny, and consistencies they'd rather rationalize, and truths they've been avoiding. Ordinary moments do not shout, but they show. They reveal the cracks in judgment, the vulnerabilities in planning, the consequences of delay. Ignoring them creates an illusion of safety, a fragile cocoon that seems protective but is built entirely on inattention. There's a strange power in ordinary moments that is often overlooked. They are continuous, recurring, and seemingly harmless. That consistency is their camouflage. While people wait for a crisis to appear, the ordinary moments accumulate, layering information, building pressure, and setting the stage for outcomes that feel sudden, only because they ignored the subtle signs that preceded them. Ordinary is the disguise that hides inevitability. Warnings embedded in ordinary moments also expose human behavior. People act predictably in comfortable routines. They overestimate their ability to adapt, underestimate the relevance of small deviations, and assume that familiarity equals security. But ordinary moments, when examined closely, are never neutral. They are microcosms of cause and effect, rehearsals for decisions that will matter when the stakes are higher. Missing them is a choice, not an accident. The subtlety of ordinary moments requires attentiveness. It demands patience, observation, and the willingness to notice the insignificant, because insignificant is only a label. Every detail, every nuance, every small departure from expectation carries the possibility of insight, warning, or opportunity. People ignore this because attention is exhausting. It forces responsibility. It forces acknowledgement. It forces the realization that consequences are already unfolding quietly beneath the surface of everyday life. Ordinary moments are also testing grounds. They test patterns, reactions, patience, and judgment. How you behave when nothing seems urgent predicts how you will respond when urgency arrives. The unnoticed signals of today become the unavoidable consequences of tomorrow. People assume they have time to recognize the significance later, but time is impartial. It moves forward whether you are prepared or not, whether you notice or ignore, whether you act or delay. People often confuse extraordinariness with magnitude. They assume that only dramatic events carry meaning, but true influence is hidden in subtleties. The seemingly minor gestures, the casual interactions, the tiny deviations from routine, these are the threads from which the fabric of consequence is woven. Ignoring them feels harmless, convenient, and safe, but the accumulated effect can be devastating or transformative, depending on whether you are blind or aware. To notice ordinary moments is to embrace vigilance without paranoia, observation without obsession, and attention without fear. It is to recognize that the world communicates constantly, but not always loudly. Every moment contains signals, lessons, and implications that only those willing to observe with clarity can interpret. Ordinary is not absence, it is camouflage. What appears insignificant often carries the weight of inevitability, the subtlety of fate, and the quiet insistence that attention must be paid before it is too late. People who recognize the extraordinary in ordinary moments gain an advantage. They act before crises escalate. They perceive what others miss. They see the patterns in the mundane, and in doing so, they position themselves ahead of consequences, opportunities, and outcomes. Ignoring ordinary moments feels safe, but it is a deception. Awareness in the everyday is where survival, insight, and influence are forged.